Welcome, everybody. My name is Ryan Bateman from DQ, and I'll be moderating the value of accessibility certifications here with Sam Evans and Paul Bohman. I'm going to take care of just a few housekeeping items before handing it over to Sam and Paul. Firstly, the session is being recorded and will be hosted on demand for all registrants. Following today's sessions, you'll also be able to download the slides here on the session page. If you require live captions in this session, you can access those in the video player itself. You can also look below the video player for the transcription link if you'd like to digest your captions that way. Lastly, we'll try to save about the last 10 minutes or so for Q&A. Please post your questions to that Q&A section that's located next to the video screen. And with that, Sam and Paul, the floor is yours.
All right. I'm going to get us started just with, this is Paul Bohman, and I'll introduce myself just a little bit. I've been in the accessibility profession for coming up on, it's crazy to say it, but 24 years, and that's a long time for me to be doing any one thing. I've been involved in creating learning content about web accessibility during this whole time. Been involved a little bit with creating the standards around the web content accessibility guidelines, and I've been the chair of the certification committee with the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, which is why we're here today. So I've been in the accessibility world for quite some time, which is kind of amazing for me to think about how long it's been. And I have some perspective on the field as a result of that. When I first started, I was a grad student, and if you ask, what is web accessibility? Most people would say, what do you mean web accessibility? I have a website, you can get to it, it's accessible. You can just type in the web address and you can get to it. And the understanding of what accessibility meant was just very shallow, very naive. And in fact, it really, the knowledge of what accessibility meant really just didn't exist in the field at that point. We've come a long way. Now, when you talk about web accessibility, it's very common for people to say, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I introduce myself to people just in the street or in social settings, and I say I work in web accessibility, and they'll say something like, oh, you mean like 508 compliance? I'm like, yeah, that's great. And that 508 compliance is certainly just a small part of the big picture of web accessibility, but to come from absolute lack of knowledge to people asking me specific questions about the field, and someone will say, oh yeah, I remember I created some learning content a while ago and we had to put in alt text for images, and they'd give some story about accessibility. And that transition from basically no knowledge whatsoever in the field to everybody having, well, not everybody, but a lot of people having at least a little bit of knowledge about accessibility, so that when I introduce myself and I say what I do for a profession, they don't just look at me and go, you do what? I don't get it. So the field has come a long way. And now we're going to talk about accessibility certifications. And if you think about it, to go from zero to now we have a professional organization for accessibility. And within that organization, you can get certified as an individual with your skills in accessibility. That is a huge transition. That's a huge leap forward for people with disabilities. I mean, that's why we're here. And that's one of the things that I love about the career that I have, and the careers that a lot of you have, or else you wouldn't be listening into this session, is that when we say we do some good in the world, we actually do some good in the world. We are out there making websites available, accessible, and workable for people who can't see, people who may be deaf or hard of hearing, or they can't use their hands, whatever the disability happens to be. We're making sure that they can use their bank, making sure that they can register for classes, making sure that they can vote, pretty basic human rights, really. And beyond just the basics, just making life more enjoyable, right? More available. So with that as a bit of an introduction, I'm excited to, I'll do the introduction for Samantha in a roundabout way. Samantha is now the one in charge of the organization, in charge of the certification process. as a matter of history, I was the one driving the process for the first certification exam. So we had a committee of people. They were from across different sectors. We had people in industry, we had people in education, we had people kind of all over who were interested in this. And we did put the first certification exam together. It has been out there for several years now. And we've been going from this very early stage of having a small organization that we weren't even sure was going to survive as a professional organization. I'll be honest about that, because it was a new idea. And it was, in some ways, a little bit controversial, because some people would say, well, we have accessibility, we have standards, and I'm not sure that I want someone saying what it is that the profession means. And so that little bit of controversy was part of the origin story. And it's not that that totally goes away. That's the story that is a part of any major organization, any major profession. And so that consideration still exists. We still have to be cognizant of the fact that we're talking about people who are already in a career, and we're trying to define what that career means. But that is also the opportunity, because we are the ones in the career who are defining this. This wasn't something that came down from on high, imposed upon the accessibility profession, where they said, all right, all you so-called accessibility professionals, now you're going to do it my way. No, that's not how it happened. This was literally from the ground up. It was a bunch of people in the profession who were interested in making this real, in making it more formalized, in making it more recognized, and making it easier for employers, making it easier for employees, making it easier to educate people, coming up with a common definition of what the field even means. And the certification exams are part of that. So with that bit of introduction and color commentary, I'm going to turn the time over to Sam to give her perspective on the value of accessibility certifications.
Hey y'all, this is Sam Evans, and I am so pleased to join Paul for this presentation. Paul's right. I work in my background for several decades is in association or nonprofit management and credentialing and certification. So the opportunity to work with IAAP as a young organization was exciting for lots of reasons. But the idea that an organization that came together, accessibility professionals together, to try to identify what the profession is so that people outside of our circle will understand what the accessibility profession means is a big boat to turn. A lot of organizations and professions take decades to get there. So I'm really pleased to support the work of accessibility professionals around the world. So the value of accessibility professionals, there's different perspectives of what the benefits are. So let's get started. Just as background for me, at IAAP, most of our staff are people with disabilities or disability advised by their loved ones. And so part of what's really magical about IAAP and the work that all of the volunteers that come together to build these certifications is that it's by accessibility professionals for accessibility professionals. So there's no third party, there's no business entity somewhere. This is your colleagues, your mentors, your peers, your managers, your employees. These are your colleagues in the profession putting together the concept to determine what the job tasks are that each of these people should be able to do. So, but let's talk a little bit more. And Paul, you were part of that original discussion with CPAC and the job task analysis, and we can talk about that when we move a little bit further on, how that builds into what the certifications are. And those values come from being able to do those job tasks in context and apply them versus conceptual knowledge alone. So let's move forward. So the value of accessibility certifications, and that's part of why we're all here together today, is what's in it for me? So what's in it for you as an individual? What's in it for my organization? What's in it for the accessibility profession? How does this fit into my career path? And what's the return on investment? So part of what's in it for you really has to do with tying into your own personal goals, your own career goals, what you want to do for your next career path, your next role, your position, how you want to move forward. But ideally, this is going to all tie back into this, third bullet on this screen is what the accessibility profession. Part of what Paul said was that people now understand what he means when he says he works in web accessibility. But there's still a lot of people that don't know that accessibility is its own career, its own profession, and it's not necessarily an add-on to other skills, to add on to other roles. And as the profession matures, this will be something that people understand more clearly. And part of what we all have to do in the profession is to make that more clear to other organizations as well. So what's in it for me? So what's in it for you is the ability to engage in some standards of common language terms, understanding concepts, applications, best practices that your colleagues and peers have spent several hundred hours putting together to make sure it's a valid assessment. And that's backed up with our partners with psychometricians, to put together a way to standardize an evaluation that allows you to say, I understand these concepts, I can apply them in context, and it's validated by an international organization that follows best practices. Because while there are standards for WCAG, we know what that means for web content accessibility guidelines, there are also standards for credentialing and certification. And so these assessments that the IAAP community have put together are validated that way. So it is by your peers, for your peers, for you. It allows you to stand out in the crowd. It illustrates your engagement with the profession. And it allows you to say, I bring this to the table in addition to my transferable skills and in addition to my experience. Excuse me. So what's in it for my organization? So a lot of our work that happens with our subject matter experts that come in to evaluate, revise the exams, the question is helping businesses understand what certifications mean and how they differ from what, if you work in technology, you're going to be familiar with skills tests, proprietary product certifications, where I took a test that says I know how to use vendor X's product so that when my company buys vendor X's product, I can support it. Those are also called certifications in the software and technical realms, and people are very familiar with that. But once you take the exam, you're done and it's over. For your organization, when someone earns a professional certification, there's ongoing engagement. So it means that once you pass your assessment and you get your certification, your credential, your badge, you have a 3-year period where you are expected to continue to engage, where you are a lifelong learner. Or if you're an established professional and you've done all the intro level and intermediate level webinars you can stomach, that you are sharing your knowledge outside of your job. You are participating in community, you're preparing submissions for community events like AXCON or meetups. You're doing your work to share your knowledge and grow the profession and bring those next couple of generations forward. So your organization can take pride in knowing that their employees have achieve that validated information. They can apply the information in context and concept. They can present that to the world at large. They can present that to their customers, to their shareholders, to their stakeholders, to say our employees are invested, our company is invested, and we can show you how we can validate and quantify that. So it can be a benefit both to the individual and to an organization.
And before I move on from that point really quick, if I may. So on the concept of what's in it for the organization, it's not particularly easy to find really good accessibility talent. And it's, the company that I work for, DQ, is all about accessibility. We are always looking for good accessibility talent. And so we know that it's a challenge to find people who are very good at it. Usually we find it, the people through word of mouth or something like that. But there are other ways that we can do this. And so if someone comes to us with a resume that says, I've got 2 years of accessibility experience, and we look at it and we go, do they? Do they actually? Do they know what they're doing? And we can go into the interview and we can talk to them about that. But if they have the certification, and there are different levels of certification, and we'll get to that in this talk as well. But if they have at least some certification, we know a couple of things about that person already. We know that they have some verified experience because that's part of what goes into qualifying for the certification exam. And we know that they've taken the initiative to get certified. That means that it's more than just, oh yeah, I've got some experience, and oh yeah, I say that I've got some knowledge about it, but they've gone to the step of, okay, we know that they want to show us that they are committed to accessibility, and that is an extra point in their favor because it shows that they have the initiative to do it, and not just some vague idea that they can write anything on their resume. But if they have a certification exam, they actually had to pass the exam, and that means something.
And what Paul's mentioning is pre-qualifications. And so some of the intermediate certifications do require validation of experience of doing the actual work. So they're not entry points on the intermediate certification. So that is something that an employer can look at and say, I already know that they have 3 years of experience doing this work. I can validate the way we do it and have them do the code experience with me. But that's a piece of the puzzle that comes through to organizations from an internationally certified organization that can certify individuals. So it's designed to have some validity and some power to express that experience that's been validated before somebody qualifies as a candidate. So, so those intermediate levels come with that additional extra for organizations in the hiring side of things, as well as for organizations that are displaying the strength of their teams. So, what's in it for the accessibility profession? Right now, the accessibility profession is skyrocketing because there's high demand. And like Paul mentioned, there's not enough qualified technical pros or champions that understand the baseline to lead projects. So what's in it for the profession is that if we can agree on standards of important terms, concepts, and ideas, and baseline concepts that must be applied so that on day one, someone can roll in and work efficiently, effectively, and deliver what's needed for the client. Those standards of what's expected from a professional, not an expert, where that comes later with experience. But if we're talking about what professionals need to bring to day one, to their team, to their contributions, having some of those expected and understood and agreed upon sets of conceptual knowledge, skills application is really important so that people can respect and understand what it means to hire an accessibility professional. Outside of the certifications, but it's how professions grow. There's accepted terminologies, concepts, ideas, rules of business etiquette, business management strategies. What do we need to be aware of? So what these certifications can bring to that is building in those expectations of the accessibility professional so that we can continue to build the profession together. So I mentioned that not all of them are for beginners. So how does professional certifications and accessibility, how does that fit into your career path? Ideally, the intermediate certifications are for people who've already been doing the work for some time. And we're going to look at a graphic in a few minutes that Paul developed some time ago. But your career path can have foundational elements. So we do have a core competencies certification, and that is the bottom third of your tenets, your foundation, your strength, your knowledge that applies in any role, in any position that involves disability inclusion or accessibility, whether you're in digital space, the built environment space, policy, governments, education, arts and culture, customer service, customer journey. There are some key tenets that are going to fit into everyone's work that is responsible for or wants to promote disability inclusion. As you move forward in your career, the intermediate certifications would be a way to quantify your applied knowledge. So the intermediate technical certifications have experience requirements and some review of some of that context. So they go beyond the starter, they go beyond the accessibility checker. They expect some hands-on first-person real-world work that you've delivered to qualify as a candidate. So that establishes some experience that somebody else validates your work that you can pass along and show to others in the field as you're working on that. So what's the ROI? And we talk to all of the people who've earned our certifications each year and ask them questions. But the big ROI, we hear different things from the management side of things, from hiring and from individuals. For individuals, the most common two elements that people tell us is that they learned a lot of things that they weren't aware they didn't know or they hadn't touched in a lot of years or a lot of time that helps them be better professionals and better champions for accessibility. And it validates that they actually know what they know and that somebody else has conferred upon them that they are indeed an intermediate technical person that can do this work. So those are the two big pieces that individuals tell us. But what we hear on the hiring side from the managers when their employees and their team members participate in certifications is that there is a tremendous growth in ingenuity and ideation and strength of program and strength of work that happens because people now feel like they've been qualified to work in their field or qualified at an intermediate level to move forward. But the bigger change to most organizations is that they have an accessibility champion that can help drive design, ideation, research and development, stop projects from going off the rails, make sure that accessibility is built into programs and services, have discussions across teams to where accessibility can become core to who they are as an organization. That return on investment isn't necessarily something that you nail to your wall and put in a frame, but the raising level of quality of work and of inclusion is really powerful. Now, for people who earn certifications and that qualifies them as a candidate to be considered for a new job, a new role, or a promotion, that is their individual ROI. But what we do as a whole, as a community and as a profession, is we indirectly and directly increase accessibility for people with disabilities, remove barriers. And that's the greatest ROI that most of us are working towards because in accessibility, we're all working in a mission-driven role. So it goes beyond stakeholders. Paul, do you have other thoughts about ROI you've seen after a few decades of watching people come through the profession and the last 7+ years of people with certifications?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of thought about it, but we can probably just move to the slides just a little bit. In fact, let's go to the next slide if you want to jump to that one. This is part of what I was saying is this growth in the value of accessibility professional with an arrow pointing upward. And of course, it's a conceptual graph just showing how much the field has progressed. So the return on investment, if we're talking about the certification, is that the profession itself has become more widely recognized, and it's easier to find people with the skills. It's still a bit of a challenge. We would love for more people to get certified. And in fact, if I can add that as basically one of the goals of this talk, if you're considering whether or not you should get the certification, I highly encourage it. I will say that there can be people at different parts of their careers. So if you have been in accessibility for 20 some years, like I have, or let's say longer, I'll be honest that the value proposition for someone in that position is probably a little bit lower because you've got your reputation, you've got your years of experience, and hopefully people know what you've done. Now, if people don't know what you've done, then I would question whether you've actually had an accessibility profession or if you've just kind of dabbled it in on the side. But if you've got that many years of experience, it's a little bit less valuable. But let's back up. For people who are just starting, this is not only a way to prove that you know what you're doing, but it's a way to learn more. And so, in fact, let's jump forward just a little bit more through the slides. And there's, in fact, just one more, but we can come back to this one in just a second.
Want to keep going forward?
Yep, one more. And so here we have this shows the different kinds of certification. I know I'm not going to steal too much of your thunder here, Samantha, but if you look at there are 5 different kinds of certification here. And for those who are just starting, the one that's at least on the screen here showing in the upper left, it's the Certified Professional Accessibility Core Competencies. That phrase core competencies is the key. And then we've got some others, which we can get to in a moment, but that is a foundational certification for anybody. That could be someone who goes into web accessibility, document accessibility, mobile app accessibility, kiosk accessibility. Even if you're talking about physical spaces, the built environment architecture, that certification is actually good for all of those. And there was a little bit of pushback on that very concept of what I just described when we were putting this together. So this is the part where I was kind of at the helm driving the vehicle, if you want to put it that way. And I considered it very important to have some sort of core competency across the entire accessibility profession. we could have just started with the web accessibility exam. And in fact, that's what most people said that they wanted. And that was understandable because web accessibility was the most prominent, most vocal group in the space. And most of the people who were putting the idea of this organization together were in the web space. That was their expertise. But that's not where we started. And I'm really glad that that's not where we started. Now, we did end up creating an exam specifically for the web, but we started with one for core competencies. And that foundation means that it's because it's across several different disciplines, it means that people studying for the exam had to learn something. So we had a lot of people in the web accessibility space who were surprised at the breadth of that initial exam. And they're saying, wow, that's more than I expected that I would have to learn for this exam. And believe it or not, that is to their benefit because it helps them think in a cross-disciplinary way. So if you're designing, let's say, transportation systems, it could be metro system, buses, airplanes, whatever it is, it's a system. It's going to have a web component. It's going to have physical platforms that people stand on. It has the actual vehicles that people would travel in. All of those things are completely separate components until you really think a little bit more deeply and you say, yes, separate, but they have to work together. And so what we wanted to do was make sure that the initial, the ground level of the certification was broad enough that it would allow accessibility professionals from different areas to talk to each other and have a common vocabulary and a common shared experience. So even though you think you're an accessibility expert in one area, and you may be right, there is value in the learning side of things to take the core competency exam. You learn about things that you didn't think you would have to learn about, but it makes you think a little bit more deeply. And that's a value, that's an ROI. So that was a long answer to your question about the ROI, but part of it is that you learn more and you become more valuable in your knowledge simply because you had to learn a little bit more. So back over to you.
So I'm gonna scroll back so that we can talk about the impact on this. So when we started in 2016, which a few months before I joined, the launch of CPACC, those core competencies, there were 35 people who did our first exam. We now have over 4,700 people around the world in more than 80 countries that hold CPAC. That is massive growth around the world, which again on CPAC, the core competencies, a lot of times people say, but I don't work in an international organization, but the world doesn't stop at geographic barriers anymore. So part of what you learned in CPAC is that international impact and rules and regulations that impact disability. So, but as we've grown, we're growing forward. We are about to issue, we've now CPAC, we'll look at those others in a moment, but more than 77,000 certifications around the world, and that's 7,000 of your colleagues. It's a massive growth, but we all have to kind of stick to some core tenets of what accessibility means. So we'll come back to what certifications are issued, and Paul's kind of touched on this. Demonstrating your commitment to the accessibility profession is one of the things that Paul mentioned. When companies look at candidates that come forward, it's definitely a way that you can advance your career by distinguishing your skills and knowledge. Professional certification should always complement your work, your transferable skills. It doesn't mean that when you come into work in accessibility and you had a different career path before, you can find those transferable skills and move them into your work in accessibility. They are definitely ways that people can put benchmarks together on their teams. I know more so on the customer service, customer journey, public facing side, CPAC is one of those that organizations use so that people can speak about disability correctly and engage with proper terms and etiquette and understanding. On the technical side, we see engineering development teams use WAS, the technical intermediate certification, as a way to kind of benchmark their intermediate skill sets. And these certifications are being listed as preferred qualifications and occasionally required certifications. So that's one of the earmarks of a profession that's growing, not unique to any particular certification, but when there is a recognition of the value of those core tenets. So All right, so I'm going to move forward to what certifications are available. So Paul mentioned that there's 5 round badges on the screen. They're dark blue. They have IAAP kind of stylized on the upper row of text in white, and the lower line is the acronyms of the certifications. So Paul's talked a little bit about CPAC, the Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies, and that is core competencies. It is talking about disability, barriers people with disabilities face, adaptive strategies and assistive technologies people with disabilities use to engage with the world, what kind of statistical data is available about disabilities around the world, universal design and universal design for learning, which I promise you, half the people that we talk to have never heard those terms before, but the aha moments they have and the ability to think about universal design in addition to accessibility makes for a lot better engagement and communications. CPAC touches a bit on web accessibility, laws, regulations around the world, and how you build accessibility into your business practice. WAS, that's an intermediate technical certification. That's a web accessibility specialist. This is for people who've been working in the technical web accessibility space for a minimum of 3 to 5 years. That minimally qualified candidate should be able to roll in on day one and work in a technical accessibility team in digital accessibility and know what the semantic underlying code is, how CSS and JavaScript deliver content, when, why, or why not to use ARIA, what a tag is, what that has to do with CMSs, understanding what QA is and usability and accessibility testing and limitations of automated and manual testing, and then moving into audit remediation, because that is still an active engagement that many organizations seek out to learn about where they are in that moment in time for their digital content. So WAS is not a starting point. It's not a knowledge check. It's for those people that are in an intermediate point in their technical accessibility career. And so people come out with having earned a WAS, they can show that somebody else has validated that minimum 3 years experience in that field, in addition to the ability to respond to the exam itself and illustrate that knowledge. It's not writing code. It's not to write code from scratch, because it's not just about the development side of things. It also pulls in our friends that do usability testing. So it's a well-rounded intermediate technical professional who's touched a good bit in each of those 3 spaces. So if somebody earned both CPAC and WAS, we grant a 3rd credential called the Certified Professional in Web Accessibility. Paul talked about CPAC being that broad breadth of information, and web accessibility is an intermediate deep dive. So CPWA, which Paul holds, is that really well-grounded, really well a good basis in understanding disability, and an intermediate. He goes beyond intermediate, but technical understanding in digital web accessibility. On the bottom row, on the left, Paul mentioned that we do touch on built environment in those core competencies of CPAC, but the certified professional and accessible built environments is specifically about built environment, the places and spaces our bodies take up, and how we engage with the physical world. So the certified professional and accessible built environment is for people. There's an introductory, an associate, and an expert level. So that certification has 3 levels, but it starts with people with a minimum of 3 to 5 years of experience who've done built environment assessments, building dynamics, audits of building spaces, focusing on one type of disability and one particular type of building. And it moves into level 2 for people who've got more experience, 5 to 7 years, for different types of built environments or public spaces, and more types of disabilities, et cetera. And then moving on to level 3, which is for people who have 10 plus years of experience. So the built environment certification is a nice focus for people that work in the built environment, about spaces. So there's information for those people who have that career track already. And the last one on the page is the accessible document specialist. And so this is for people that are working in accessible documents. Everyone creates documents, every organization creates them. If everybody had a web team that could make every document HTML, none of us would have work. The reality is every organization creates documents. So we can create documents and focus on the authoring formats, word processing, spreadsheets, presentations, and desktop publishing. ADS works in writing and creating things in accessible in the authoring format so that they can be exported to to a final format. So this goes beyond somebody who's using accessibility checkers. So this is going to get into the technical components of remediation in final formats too. So that means you're going to get into things that are scanned, that are copied, that need to be OCR'd, or that are just flat images that you have to go in and recreate to tag, to add their attributes and the proper properties to things so that they can be read and used in a final format. And understanding those technical components. How do you write up recommendations for using that knowledge from your office suite that you use in your office or your company or your organization to build proper training? Because if we start building things accessibly, there's a lot less remediation needed. And then how do you build that into your organization? So that's a high level overview about the breadth of the different certifications. The intermediate technical are the WAS, the built environment, and the accessible document specialist. And CPAC is, and we're going to show on this next slide, kind of a graphic that explains that core foundational core competencies. So we're gonna go into that, and I'm gonna on this slide it's the title is what IAAP certifications are not. And so there are things that professional certifications are designed to do and what they're not designed to do. And so there's a little badge in the upper right-hand corner that says highly expert certified. IAAP certifications are not going to qualify that somebody is an expert. It's not what they're designed to do. And so I'm going to let Paul talk about the graphic on this screen. That's his pyramid reference point that I come back to frequently.
Yeah, so just really briefly, the whole idea is there is a foundation. I talked about that with the core competency exam. We have a step up on the pyramid from there to the intermediate or technical or specific exams, and the example was given of the web accessibility specialist exam. So that's the next step. And we did consider having a third level of exam at one point, but that conversation didn't last for very long because we knew that for people who are actually considered experts, that's not something that is granted via an exam. To be considered an expert, you actually have to be an expert and your peers judge you as an expert, right? So even if there's someone who could pass an exam that all experts would, we would consider that they would pass that exam, that doesn't necessarily translate into being a well-respected expert in the field, right? So there's this top level that we just kind of don't address because we're expecting that once let's say you've got the core competency exam, you get the intermediate, and then you go on to have an illustrious career in accessibility, which is fantastic. And at that point, your credentials need to speak for themselves, right? So the IAAP does not get into credentialing reputation. That's something you have to be in charge of once you've passed a certain level of knowledge. And I realize we're getting down to the wire in terms of the time left for our talk, so we should probably tell them how to get certified.
Yep.
I'll let you do that.
So how to get certified? So what's the process? So first piece of the puzzle, and there's some graphics on the right-hand side of the slide. There's a circle at top that says know your stuff. So first step is to know your stuff. So whether that means you bring your knowledge with you with your own lived experience, whether that means you studied and prepared from the body of knowledge and other resources. So you want to know your stuff. So you want to know the content that's on the certification that you're pursuing. One of the things to consider really though is if you're looking at getting qualified to sit for the intermediate, and that's a middle of that pyramid, is doing the work, you have to have that work experience. So you want to make sure that you've met the prerequisites listed for your experience. Have you actually done the job tasks? So having generic work experience, or if you've done work experience but it's not tied directly to accessibility, is part of the challenge. And the actual content outline, which looks like a table of contents for the body of knowledge, and the body of knowledge has bulleted study tasks. Those study tasks are job tasks. So the minimally qualified candidate for the intermediate certifications must have experience doing those job tasks in advance. So that's how that qualification works. Then you need to prepare. So study for the exam. So the core for each of these certifications to study and prepare is the content outline and the body of knowledge. Those are free resources. They're available on the website under the About page for each certification. And to learn how to study again, for many of us, it may have been a long time since we've actually studied. So that's a bit more than just reading. So each person's study preparation plan will be different. And so you can use the body of knowledge. That should be your base. That should be what you use as your core. You can use other resources, like prep courses, understanding that preparation courses aren't going to guarantee success and they shouldn't be the basis for your exam. There are other classes and courses. If you encounter a topic that you're just not familiar with, you may build those into your study preparation program. And then once you've taken your study together, you've applied, you go to apply, you know how you want to take the exam, whether that's remote, online, private proctored, accessibility and accommodations, how your organization's going to pay, all that's up to you. You apply, you take the exam, and in 4 to 6 weeks after that exam closes, you get your results. Congratulations. We're happy to let you know that you passed the exam. You joined X number of thousands of your colleagues around the world. Here's an invitation for a Credly badge and your certificate and a letter of support, but that starts your 3 years while your certification is valid. And so that's where you begin your continuous improvement. And there is a like a road sign that's represented in green with an arrow going forward for continuous improvement. So how to get certified? You're going to do your research first. You're going to read the about pages and determine which one is the right fit for you. You're going to do the work to make sure that you've met the pre-qualifications. You'll do your study plan, your preparation. You'll sit for the exam, and you'll earn your certification if all goes well. So um, so that's the process. And there is on the main certification overview webpage, one of the slides will have that link, is your guide to discover, prepare, plan, take your apply, take your test, and then do your maintaining and your continuous improvement. So this is where that lifelong learner concept comes in. And that's why it's a little bit different for professional certifications than others, because earning your certification is your first step, but you're going to move forward. So you know your stuff. You've identified that. You're going to do the work. So you've done the work to qualify. You're going to do the work to put together your study plan. You've prepared for the exam. You're going to apply, pay, and schedule your exam, and then you're going to maintain. And then ideally in 3 years' time, you're going to renew your certification. And so there are some qualifications to renew.
And I will mention, just so we're in the middle of AXCON, which is one of the best resources for renewing your certification. All you have to do is listen to the talks, and you would submit that as proof that you are continually learning. So you get certified first, then you do something like go to the AXCON talks to continue your education. And I really support. Oh, go ahead.
No, but we are. But AXCON is great. One of the nice things that we've done is we've intentionally designed maintenance to not have a financial cost. You can maintain your certifications without incurring financial expenses because there are so many wonderful free resources available to our community to earn your continuing accessibility education credits. We call them cakes because it's delicious and delightful, and maintaining your knowledge and staying abreast of what's happening in the field is important. So that being a lifelong learner is important. Sharing your knowledge. So everybody that's presenting at AXCON, they get credit for sharing their knowledge outside of their job to the community. So you don't have to only be a learner, you can also share your knowledge. So Paul mentioned AXCON. You're here at AXCON, you've registered, you're going to save that registration as an email, and then you'll make a list of the sessions you attended. And as long as it maps to your certification, then you can earn credits. It's a great way to maintain a whole year, if not more's worth of your credits. And you can submit those in real time as you earn them so that you don't have to wait until the end of your 3 years and try to remember everything that you had done. When you get your 3 years time period, you'll get a notice from us that says you've met your cake requirements, or you have a few left. You'd like to submit those. If you'd like to renew, here's your renewal. You have your option if you're a member of the membership organization at IAAP at no fee. And if you're not a member, what the fee is for that. To maintain and renew, you'll get a new certification certificate itself and a Credly badge. But it's really a good way. The education, the knowledge that you earn is really a good way to make sure that not everything that you can learn is on the job, and it gives you some time and exposure to other places and spaces. You can enhance your value proposition for your current career and future-proof your opportunities by staying on top of what's happening in industry. It's good for community building and for networking. So why to maintain is important. So this slide that we're presenting has The email certification@accessibilityassociation.org. My direct line at my office. We do have drop-in sessions twice a month. There's an RSVP on each of the certification web pages. If you're an IAAP member, there are connection study groups, and the accessibility Slack community also has certification prep channels. So there's a lot of information in a short period of time. But so I'm going to leave this up for just a moment. But Paul, I think we'll come back and take questions from the
Yeah.
community.
Yeah. I've got quite a few. We have got an active chat. Sam and Paul, thank you so much for your talk. Let me just remind everybody to go to the Q&A if you'd like to submit a question. If you could evaluate the questions that are already there and upvote the ones that you want answers to, that'll help me pick out the most popular ones for Sam and Paul. First question with the most upvotes presently is, how do you demonstrate your experience if you haven't had strict accessibility roles at previous jobs? And accessibility is in quotes.
So I'll take a first pass at that. So one of the ways I'm guessing the person is asking about technical accessibility. So for CPACC for CPAC, I have had a role with that as a responsibility. So it doesn't have to be in your job title, but your responsibilities have been around accessibility, or you have a new role with responsibilities, or you have a desire to move into accessibility. But for technical web accessibility, it doesn't necessarily have to be your role title, but you should be able to. The easiest way is if you have a resume that clearly shows these have been my responsibilities in technical web accessibility. You can either create that resume, or there's an opportunity, those job tasks that I mentioned, those study bullets in the body of knowledge, you can select which ones of those job tasks you've performed, write a short paragraph about how you've encountered those. This is all part of the screening application for WAS. You can write a paragraph about how you've encountered those elements, how that impacts you at work, and how you've done the work for each of the domain sections. So there's two different ways to qualify, but we do look for people that can actually speak to words, and the way we try to describe it is use words that would clearly tell a hiring manager that you are qualified to join their team tomorrow, to step in and do the work effectively, independently, and proficiently. So being able to summarize things in a small bite to talk about how you've done that work.
Thanks so much, Sam. Okay, I've got another one here. And let me know if you think this is out of band, but the question states, beyond accessibility certifications, are there any continuing education opportunities like graduate programs at universities that are worth exploring?
So the short answer is yes, but for me to go and list them all would take me out of, I'm not familiar with every single program that's out there. In fact, my doctoral research was focusing on 3 of them, and that was a decade ago. So it's a little bit dated as far as my doctoral research goes. But the short answer is yes, you do have to do some research. I'm not going to try to plug any of them at the moment, but the short answer is yes, there are programs. Usually the most effective programs aren't degrees in and of themselves, although those do exist, and you can get a degree in an accessibility related profession. However, you can also just you can get a degree in a related field where you know that they have accessibility courses as part of the required curriculum. It's a little bit harder to find that way, but those do exist. It's spread out, and that's probably as good an answer as I can give in this quick response.
Thanks so much, Paul. I think we've got maybe a question for one more here. This one's got a lot of upvotes. Paul, I know that on the DQ University prep side, as far as certification prep goes, there are scholarships available for people with disabilities. I have a slightly related question to that. I think for Sam, the question states, I'm wondering if there's any financial aid or discounts for IAAP membership or certifications available for those experiencing financial hardship.
We don't have them yet. What we have found is that there are a good number of our colleagues that are willing to sponsor people and host those. So, but our goal is to get a foundation established where we can offer those for charitable donations. But at the moment, we do not.
Yeah, sometimes that can be built into an organization. So a company like DQ or some other company that focuses on accessibility might have a payback program where if you pass the exam, they pay back, or it might sponsor you to take the exam, or they might simply have the organization as a whole as a member of the IAAP, which means that you don't have to pay yourself individually. So there's a little bit of you have to get into a company like that, but there are ways around it.
Fantastic. What a great way to kick off AXCon. I really appreciate your time, both Sam and Paul and everyone else attending. I hope you all have a great day.